The summer heat in Phoenix was unforgiving as Staff Sergeant James Cooper pulled his weathered Ford pickup into the dusty parking lot of the Morrison construction site. At 42 years old, his face showed the lines of someone who had seen too much during his 3 tours overseas, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. The construction site, sprawling over 10 acres of prime downtown real estate, would be his new responsibility. The site supervisor, Mike Torres, greeted Cooper with a firm handshake. "Glad to have you on board, Sergeant," Torres said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We've had nothing but trouble these past few weeks. Equipment going missing, graffiti showing up on our machines, and my workers are getting nervous." Cooper nodded. His military haircut still maintained even 3 months after returning to civilian life. He scanned the perimeter of the site, already noting weak points in the security setup. The chain-link fence had several sections that needed repair, and the lighting was inadequate for night surveillance. "Show me where the problem started," Cooper said, his voice carrying the calm authority that came from years of commanding troops in high-stress situations. Torres led him through the site, past towering cranes and half-finished structures. Workers in hard hats paused their tasks to watch them pass, curious about the new security manager. Cooper's straight posture and purposeful walk made it clear he wasn't a typical security guard. "It started small," Torres explained, pointing to a bulldozer covered in spray paint. "First, it was just teenagers doing typical vandalism, but last week, someone hotwired one of our excavators and drove it into a pile of materials. Cost us nearly $50,000 in damages and delays." Cooper stopped to examine the security camera mounted on a nearby pole. It was positioned poorly, leaving a significant blind spot. He made a mental note to address this immediately. "What about the police?" Cooper asked, though he already knew the answer. Torres shrugged. "They're stretched thin. By the time they respond, the troublemakers are long gone. That's why we hired you, your military background and security experience. We need someone who can think ahead of these guys." As they walked back to the main office, Cooper noticed fresh motorcycle tracks in the dirt near the west entrance. Multiple bikes had been there recently, and the pattern suggested they weren't just passing by. Inside the site office, Torres handed Cooper a thick folder. "Here are all the incident reports from the past month. The company's losing money every time these vandals strike. Insurance rates are going through the roof." Cooper sat down at his new desk, which faced the window overlooking the main entrance, and began reviewing the reports methodically, just as he used to review mission briefings. The pattern was clear. The incidents were escalating, becoming more organized and destructive. "I need to make some changes," Cooper said, looking up from the papers. "First, we'll upgrade the cameras and fix those fence sections. Then we need better lighting, especially around the equipment storage area." Torres nodded eagerly. "Whatever you need." The company approved a decent security budget after that last incident. "Just keep our site safe." As Torres left the office, Cooper stood by the window, watching the construction workers heading home for the day. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Soon, the site would be empty except for the regular night watchman. Cooper checked his watch. 6:45 p.m. His first official shift wouldn't start until tomorrow, but he planned to stay late tonight. Something about those motorcycle tracks bothered him. 15 years in the military had taught him to trust his instincts. He pulled out his phone and called an old army buddy who now worked in local law enforcement. "Hey Rick, it's Cooper. I need some intel on any motorcycle gangs operating around downtown Phoenix." "Yeah, I took that security job I mentioned. No, nothing's happened yet, but I'd rather be prepared." As he listened to his friend's information, Cooper watched the last workers leave the site. The huge machines stood silent against the darkening sky, casting long shadows across the ground. His gut told him this job would be more than just routine security work. Tomorrow, he would begin implementing his security upgrades, but tonight he would watch and learn. After all, that's what had kept him and his men alive during 3 tours: careful observation and preparation. The desert wind picked up, rattling the office windows. Staff Sergeant James Cooper settled into his chair, ready for a long night of surveillance. He had faced worse situations in the military, but something told him this civilian job was about to become very interesting. Cooper's first week at the construction site passed quietly, but that changed on a warm Thursday night. He sat in his office, monitoring the newly installed security cameras when the first rumble of motorcycles caught his attention. The clock showed 11:45 p.m. Through camera 3, he watched as 5 motorcycles circled the perimeter of the site, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searching eyes. The riders wore leather vests with a distinctive patch, a skull wearing a crown of thorns. Cooper recognized the symbol from his conversation with Rick, his police contact. Desert Raiders, Cooper muttered to himself, reaching for his notebook. These weren't random troublemakers. The Desert Raiders had a reputation for targeting construction sites across Arizona, starting with vandalism before moving on to more serious crimes. He picked up his radio. "Tommy, you seeing this?" he asked the night guard who patrolled the ground level. "Yes, sir," Tommy's voice crackled back. "Want me to approach them?" "Negative. Stay in position and observe. Don't let them spot you." Cooper watched as the bikers stopped at the west entrance. Their leader, a tall man with a gray beard, got off his bike and walked up to the new fence. Even through the grainy camera footage, Cooper could see the man's confident swagger. He was testing the security, looking for weaknesses. The night guard's voice came through the radio again. "Sir, they're taking pictures of our camera positions." "Good," Cooper replied calmly. "Let them. Those aren't our real cameras anyway." He smiled, remembering how he had installed dummy cameras in obvious positions while hiding the actual surveillance equipment in less noticeable spots. The bikers spent 20 minutes circling the site. Cooper documented everything: their arrival time, the number of bikes, their behavior patterns. He even managed to get clear shots of their license plates using the high-resolution cameras he had specially positioned. When they finally rode away, Cooper picked up his phone and dialed Rick. "Got some visitors tonight," Cooper said when his friend answered. "Desert Raiders, 5 bikes led by a big guy with a gray beard." "That would be Marcus Hawk Thompson," Rick replied. "He's their leader. Been arrested 6 times, but nothing ever sticks." The Raiders usually start small, testing a site's security before making bigger moves. Cooper wrote down the name. "Any recent activity I should know about?" "They hit a site in Tucson last month. Started with vandalism, then graduated to stealing equipment. The company lost $500,000 in machinery before they could improve their security." After hanging up, Cooper walked down to meet Tommy for their nightly security check. The young guard looked nervous. "Those guys mean business, don't they?" Tommy asked, shining his flashlight across the dark construction yard. "They think they do," Cooper replied. He stopped at one of the excavators, checking that its new GPS tracking device was properly hidden. He had installed trackers on all the valuable equipment during his first days on the job. But what if they come back with more guys? Tommy's voice betrayed his anxiety. Cooper turned to face the younger man in the moonlight, his expression calm but determined. "Listen, Tommy. In the military, we had a saying, proper preparation prevents poor performance. These guys are used to dealing with regular security guards who just call the police and hope for the best. We're going to be different." They finished their rounds, and Cooper showed Tommy how to check the new motion sensors he had installed along the fence line. "Remember," he said, "our job isn't to fight them. It's to make this site such a hard target that they move on to somewhere else." Back in his office, Cooper began typing his nightly report. He included detailed descriptions of each biker and their bikes. His military training had taught him the value of good intelligence. As he worked, he heard more motorcycles in the distance, but these were just passing by. Still, he noticed how Tommy immediately radioed in to report the sound. The young guard was learning. Cooper smiled slightly. The Desert Raiders thought they were casing the site tonight, but they didn't realize they were the ones being studied. In Afghanistan, he had learned that the best way to deal with threats was to understand them completely before they made their move. The night grew quieter, but Cooper remained alert. The real test would come soon, and he wanted to be ready. He pulled up the construction site's blueprints on his computer and began marking potential entry points. The game was just beginning, and he intended to stay several steps ahead of his opponents. 3 nights after their first appearance, the Desert Raiders made their move. This time, they came at 2 a.m., when most of the city was asleep. Cooper sat in his darkened office, watching 8 motorcycles approach on his security monitors. They moved with purpose, heading straight for the site's back entrance. Right on schedule, Cooper muttered, reaching for his radio. "Tommy, they're here. Stay in position and remember the plan." "Copy that," Tommy whispered back. He was hidden in the security shed near where Cooper predicted the bikers would enter. The raiders didn't waste time. 2 men used bolt cutters on the fence while the others kept watch. Their leader, Hawk, supervised the operation. They didn't notice the small red lights of the real security cameras recording their every move. Cooper watched as they rolled their bikes through the gap in the fence, their engines off, pushing their motorcycles quietly across the construction yard. It was a smart tactic, but one he had expected. "They're heading toward the equipment lot," Tommy reported softly through the radio. "Hold your position," Cooper replied. He stood up, straightened his security uniform, and grabbed his flashlight. It was time to introduce himself. The bikers had reached the row of excavators when Cooper flipped the switch on his desk. Instantly, powerful floodlights illuminated the entire equipment yard, catching the raiders in brilliant white light. They froze, momentarily blinded. Cooper walked out of his office building, moving with the calm confidence that came from years of military experience. He could see the bikers clearly now, all wearing their leather vests with the raiders' emblem, a skull with a crown of thorns. The skull symbol gleamed on their vests, some of them holding spray, paint cans, and tools. "Gentlemen," Cooper called out, his voice carrying across the yard, "this is private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Hawk stepped forward, his gray beard catching the light. He was tall, probably 63, with massive arms covered in tattoos. Well, he sneered. "Look what we have here, a rent-a-cop trying to play hero." The other bikers spread out, creating a loose semicircle. Cooper noticed how they moved. These weren't amateur thugs, they had experience with intimidation. "Staff Sergeant James Cooper," he introduced himself, maintaining a professional tone. "I manage security for this site. You've damaged private property and broken multiple laws already tonight. Leave now and we can avoid making this situation worse." Hawk laughed and his men joined in. "Staff Sergeant." "Huh? This ain't the Army, soldier boy. This is our territory. Maybe you didn't get the message yet, but construction sites in this area pay us protection money. It's just good business." Cooper took a step forward, his posture relaxed but ready. "Actually, I got your message clearly 3 nights ago when you were scouting the site. I also got good pictures of your license plates, which are now with several law enforcement agencies." This made some of the bikers shift uncomfortably, but Hawk wasn't impressed. He pulled out a heavy chain from his bike. "Last chance, soldier boy. Walk away and forget what you saw tonight. Otherwise, things might get messy." Cooper sighed. In the distance, he could hear Tommy radioing the police as planned, but the nearest patrol was at least 10 minutes away. "Mr. Thompson," Cooper said, using Hawk's real name, which made the biker leader's eyes narrow. "I've spent 3 tours dealing with people who were actually scary. You're just making a poor business decision right now." Hawk's face turned red with anger, and he took a threatening step forward, chains swinging at his side. "You think you know who you're dealing with?" "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Cooper replied. "Marcus Hawk Thompson, age 45, 3 stints in state prison, leader of the Desert Raiders for the past 8 years. The real question is, do you know who you're dealing with?" At that moment, red and blue lights began flashing at both site entrances, but they weren't police cars. Cooper had installed emergency lights as part of his security upgrades. The bikers' heads whipped around, momentarily distracted. "Those aren't cops," Hawk growled, though he sounded less certain. Maybe not," Cooper said. "But the real police are already on their way, and everything that's happened here tonight is on camera. So, like I said, you can leave now and well call it a warning, or you can stay and face the consequences." Hawk gripped his chain tighter, looking at his men and then back at Cooper. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone waited to see what would happen next as 2 very different kinds of warriors sized each other up under the bright construction site lights. The standoff lasted for what felt like hours, But in reality, it was only minutes. Hawk was the first to break the tension, spitting on the ground near Cooper's boots. "This ain't over, soldier boy," he growled, wrapping the chain around his fist. "Nobody makes the raiders look stupid." Cooper remained still, his military training keeping him focused despite the threat. In the distance, real police sirens began to wail, the sound making several of the younger bikers look nervously over their shoulders. "Boss, we should go," one of them said, already backing toward his motorcycle. Hawk's face twisted with rage, but even he could see the situation slipping away from him. With a final glare at Cooper, he barked orders to his men. "Mount up. We're out of here." The bikers scrambled to their bikes, engines roaring to life in the quiet night. As they rode off through the cut fence, Hawk turned his head and shouted, "Watch your back, Staff Sergeant. The raiders don't forget." Once they were gone, Tommy emerged from his hiding spot, looking both relieved and excited. "That was intense. Did you see how they just backed down?" "They didn't back down," Cooper corrected him, his expression serious. "They just decided to change tactics. The real trouble starts now." He was right. The next morning, Cooper arrived at the construction site to find his personal truck vandalized. All 4 tires were slashed, and "Dead Man" was spray-painted across the hood in red letters. Mike Torres, the site supervisor, came running up. "Jesus, Cooper, we need to call the police." "Already did," Cooper replied calmly, taking photos of the damage with his phone. "But this isn't about my truck. This is about sending a message." Throughout the day, Cooper noticed more bikes passing by the site than usual. They weren't desert raiders, just regular people on motorcycles, but he knew Hawk was having the site watched. It was a classic intimidation tactic he'd seen before in Afghanistan. Let your target know they're being observed. During his lunch break, Cooper received a call from his police contact, Rick. "Got some bad news, buddy," Rick said. "The raiders have been asking questions about you around town. They're trying to find out where you live, your routines. Everything." Cooper took a bite of his sandwich, unconcerned. "Expected as much. What else?" "They've done this before, James. The last security manager who stood up to them ended up in the hospital." "Maybe you should consider—" "I'm not backing down, Rick," Cooper interrupted. "These guys prey on people's fear. That's their real weapon, not those chains or their tough guy act." After hanging up, Cooper called a meeting with all the site security personnel in the small break room. He laid out his expectations clearly. "The raiders will be back," he explained to the nervous guards. "But this time they'll try to catch us off guard. They'll probe for weaknesses, watch our routines, and wait for us to make a mistake." "What do we do?" Tommy asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. Cooper pulled out a map of the site. "We change everything, new patrol routes, random timing, different security positions every night. In the military, we called it tactical unpredictability." As he outlined the new security protocols, Cooper noticed the guards sitting up straighter, their fear turning into determination. He had seen the same transformation in young soldiers. Once people understood they had a solid plan, their confidence grew. That evening, as the sun set over the construction site, Cooper stood on the roof of the main office building, watching the city lights come on. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Smart soldiers know when to run." Cooper deleted the message without responding. In his mind, he was already planning the next phase of site security. The raiders thought they were fighting a simple security guard, but they were actually up against something they didn't understand. A soldier who had learned his tactics fighting much more dangerous enemies. He heard motorcycles in the distance and smiled slightly. Let them watch, let them plan. He had spent his military career protecting his people against worse odds than this. The desert raiders were about to learn a hard lesson about picking the wrong target. 2 days after the truck incident, Cooper sat in his office making an important phone call. The tension with the desert raiders had reached a point where he needed to bring in reinforcements. Not out of fear, but because every good soldier knows the value of having reliable backup. "Jake, I need a favor," Cooper spoke into his phone. "Remember that time in Kandahar when we were outnumbered 3-1? On the other end of the line, Jake Martinez, his former squad mate, chuckled. "You mean when you came up with that crazy plan that actually worked?" "What's going on, Coop?" Cooper explained the situation with the raiders. Jake listened quietly, then said, "I'll be there tomorrow. And I'm bringing Davis with me." Cooper smiled. Jake and Davis had been his most trusted men during their service. Jake was an expert in perimeter security, while Davis had been their communication specialist. Together, they had handled situations far worse than a motorcycle gang. The next morning, Jake and Davis arrived at the construction site in a black pickup truck. Both men were in their 40s like Cooper, and carried themselves with the same military bearing. They weren't there to fight, they were there to implement a strategy. "Nice setup you got here," Jake said, examining the security cameras. "But I see why you called us. These blind spots could be a problem." Davis was already working on his laptop, hacking into local traffic cameras near the site. "Give me a few hours and he'll have eyes on every approach route they might use." Cooper gathered his security team for introductions. Tommy and the other guards looked impressed by the new arrivals. Having 3 experienced veterans on site boosted everyone's confidence. "Listen up," Cooper addressed his team. "The raiders think they're dealing with just one man. That's their first mistake. Jake here will reorganize our patrol patterns, and Davis is upgrading our surveillance. Starting tonight, we run this site like a military operation." Throughout the day, they transformed the construction site's security. Jake set up motion sensors in the blind spots and created overlapping patrol zones. Davis installed a new communication system that couldn't be intercepted by simple radio scanners. "Just like old times," Jake commented as they worked. "Remember that forward operating base in Helmand Province? Same principles apply here." By sunset, the construction site had become a digital fortress. Every entrance was monitored, every piece of equipment had hidden GPS trackers, and the security team was organized into 3-person units, just like military fire teams. Cooper knew the raiders were watching. He spotted their observers. Men on bikes parked at random locations around the site, trying to look casual as they used their phones to take pictures. "Let them watch," Davis said, monitoring the surveillance feeds. "They think they're gathering intelligence. We're feeding them what we want them to see." That evening, Cooper called another team meeting. The room felt different now. His guards sat with new confidence, understanding they were part of a professional security operation. "The raiders will notice these changes," Cooper explained. "They'll see the new cameras, the increased patrols, the professional backup. This is psychological warfare. We're showing them that this site isn't worth the trouble." Tommy raised his hand. "But what if they still try something?" Jake stepped forward. "Then they'll find out why military veterans are the wrong people to mess with. We've got every inch of this place covered, multiple layers of security and a direct line to law enforcement." Davis added, "Plus, we've identified most of their members through surveillance. If anything happens here, we know exactly who to look for." As the meeting ended, Cooper's phone buzzed. Another text from an unknown number. "Bringing reinforcements won't save you." Cooper showed the message to Jake and Davis. They both grinned. "They're getting nervous," Jake said. "That's why they're trying to sound tough." "In the Army, we learned that the loudest threats often come from the weakest enemies," Davis added. The construction site, now transformed into a secure compound, was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, casting long shadows across the equipment yard. Somewhere out there, the raiders were watching, planning their next move. But this time, they would find more than they bargained for. "All right," Cooper said to his team, "night shift, take your positions. Remember your training, stay alert, stay professional. The real test is coming soon." The raiders' attack came 3 nights later, just after midnight. They arrived in force, 15 motorcycles approaching from different directions, their engines purposely quiet as they neared the construction site. Multiple targets approaching, Davis' voice crackled through the radio. He sat in the security office, monitoring the surveillance system. "They're splitting into 3 groups. Cooper watched from his hidden position near the main gate. Jake was stationed on the east side, while Tommy and the other guards were positioned strategically around the site. Everyone was in place just as they had practiced. "Let them enter," Cooper ordered calmly. "Remember the plan, don't engage unless necessary." Through his night vision goggles, Cooper watched as Hawk led the first group through a section of the fence they had quietly cut. The raiders thought they were being stealthy, but motion sensors were already tracking their every move. Group 2 entering from the east side, Jake reported quietly. 5 men carrying bolt cutters and what looks like crowbars. Group 3 is heading toward the equipment yard, Davis added. They've got chains and some kind of tools with them. Cooper smiled slightly. The raiders were doing exactly what he had predicted, spreading out to cause maximum damage. But they didn't realize they were walking into a carefully prepared trap. When all 15 raiders were inside the perimeter, Cooper gave the signal, "Execute Plan Delta." Instantly, powerful floodlights blazed to life, bathing the entire site in brilliant white light. At the same time, Davis activated the new security system. Steel barriers rose from the ground at key points, cutting off the raiders' escape routes. The sound of police sirens filled the air, some real, some part of their defensive plan. What the hell? Hawk's voice carried across the yard as his men scrambled in confusion. Cooper stepped out of his hiding spot, followed by Jake and 2 security guards. From other positions, more guards emerged, all wearing professional security gear and moving with military precision. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson," Cooper called out, his voice firm but calm. "I believe we discussed trespassing before." Hawk spun around, his face twisted with rage. "You think your little light show scares us? There's 15 of us and 6 or 7 of you." "Numbers aren't everything," Cooper replied. "Look around you." Red targeting lasers from non-lethal weapons appeared on the chests of several raiders. Davis had set up automated defense systems that looked much more threatening than they actually were. The psychological effect was immediate. Several bikers raised their hands, looking nervously at the red dots on their bodies. "You're surrounded," Cooper continued. "Real police are 2 minutes out. We have crystal clear video of every one of you breaking in. And those new bikes you're riding? We've already logged all their plates." Hawk took a threatening step forward but froze when Jake's voice cut through the night. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Staff Sergeant Cooper might be diplomatic, but am not as patient. The sound of approaching police sirens grew louder. These ones were real. Cooper could see the fight draining from the raiders' faces as they realized how completely they had been outmaneuvered. "Last chance," Cooper announced. "Drop your weapons and leave peacefully, or stay and explain yourselves to the police. Your choice." One of the younger raiders dropped his crowbar. Then another laid down his chain. Like dominoes falling, the gang members began abandoning their weapons. Hawk stood alone, his fists clenched in fury. "This isn't over, soldier boy," he snarled. "Actually, it is," Cooper replied, "because right now Davis is sending evidence of your activities to every law enforcement agency in Arizona, including some federal ones that take a special interest in organized crime." The first police cars appeared at the main gate. Hawk looked at his men, who were already heading back to their bikes, then back at Cooper. "Next time," Hawk began. "There won't be a next time," Cooper interrupted. "You're a businessman, right? Consider this site a bad investment and move on. Otherwise, the next video package Davis sends out will include everything we have on the Desert Raiders operations." For a moment, Hawk stood his ground. Then, with a final curse, he turned and headed back to his motorcycle. The raiders rode away just as the police arrived, their reputation in tatters. Cooper watched them leave, then turned to his team. "Good work, everyone. Clean up the site and document everything. Tomorrow we go back to normal operations." But everyone knew things would never be truly normal again. The night the Desert Raiders learned they had messed with the wrong soldier would become a legend in local security circles. The morning after the confrontation, news spread quickly through Phoenix's construction community. Workers arrived at the site early, eager to hear what had happened. They found Cooper and his team calmly repairing the cut sections of the fence, acting as if the previous night's events were nothing special. Mike Torres, the site supervisor, rushed over to Cooper with a newspaper in his hand. "Have you seen this? You're all over the local news." Cooper glanced at the headline, "Veteran Security Team Outsmarts Notorious Biker Gang." He handed the paper back to Torres, more interested in checking the repair work on the fence. The company president called. Torres continued excitedly. "He wants to meet with you today. I think you're getting a promotion." Jake and Davis approached, carrying coffee cups from the site office. Already got 3 calls from other construction companies, Jake mentioned. They want to know if we're available for security consulting. Cooper nodded thoughtfully. The confrontation with the raiders had played out exactly as he planned, but he knew better than to celebrate too early. 20 years in the military had taught him that victory wasn't just about winning one battle. Around mid-morning, a police car pulled up to the site. Rick stepped out, grinning broadly. "You're not going to believe this," he said, walking over to Cooper. "The desert raiders are falling apart." "What do you mean?" Cooper asked, though he had expected something like this after last night. "Their reputation is shot. Half their members are talking about leaving the gang. Hawk's leadership is being questioned. They're even pulling out of other construction sites they've been terrorizing." Davis looked up from his laptop. "My police contacts say similar things. Apparently, word got around about how easily we handled them. Other gangs are laughing at them." Cooper gathered his team for a meeting in the break room. Tommy and the other guards sat straighter now, proud of their part in the previous night's success. "Good work, everyone," Cooper began, "but stay alert. Wounded animals are often the most dangerous. The raiders might be defeated, but we can't let our guard down." As if to prove his point, around lunchtime, a lone motorcycle approached the site. The rider was young, probably one of the newer raiders. He stopped at the gate and asked to speak with Cooper. Under the watchful eyes of Jake and the security team, Cooper met with the young biker. The man looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "Hawk sent me," he said quietly. "He wants to make a deal." Cooper crossed his arms. "I'm listening. He says if you don't release the evidence you have about our other operations, the raiders will never bother this site again. Well, stay completely away from this whole area." Cooper studied the young man's face. "Tell Hawk I don't make deals. But if the raiders want to change their business model to something legal, that's their choice." After the messenger left, Jake walked over. "You think they'll really back off?" "They don't have a choice," Cooper replied. "We didn't just beat them physically, we destroyed their reputation. In their world, that's far worse." Throughout the afternoon, Cooper received calls from various construction company executives. The story of how his team had handled the raiders had made him suddenly in demand. Everyone wanted to know his security secrets. "We should start our own security consulting firm," Davis suggested during their evening meeting. "Think about it, we could help other sites implement proper security measures, stop guys like the raiders before they even become a problem." Cooper considered the idea. He looked around at his team, Jake and Davis, his trusted military brothers. Tommy, who had grown from a nervous guard into a confident professional, and the other security staff who had proven their worth. They had become more than just a security team. As the sun set over the construction site, Cooper made his decision. This wasn't just about one victory over a biker gang. It was about using their skills and experience to make a real difference. "All right," he said to his team, "let's do it. But we do it right, professional, legal, and by the book, just like we handled the raiders." The enthusiasm in the room was palpable. They all knew that the confrontation with the desert raiders wasn't just an end. It was a beginning. They had proven that proper training, strategy, and professionalism could overcome any threat. As night fell, Cooper walked the perimeter one last time. The site was quiet, peaceful. He smiled, knowing that somewhere out there, other construction sites needed their help. The soldier in him was ready for the next mission. 6 months after the showdown with the desert raiders, the Morrison construction site had transformed into a model of security excellence. Cooper, Jake, and Davis' new company, Veteran Security Solutions, had become the most sought-after security consulting firm in Arizona. On a warm morning, Cooper sat in his new office, looking through the large windows at the completed construction project. The building stood tall and proud, a testament to what could be accomplished when people work together without fear of intimidation. Another request just came in, Tommy announced, walking into the office. He had become Cooper's operations manager, handling the day-to-day running of their expanding business. A construction company in Tucson, they're having trouble with local gangs. Cooper nodded. "Set up a meeting for next week." "And how's the training program going?" "Great. We've got 15 veterans enrolled. Davis is teaching them about surveillance systems today, and Jake's handling physical security protocols. Their company had grown beyond just providing security. They now operated a training program for military veterans, helping them transition into civilian security work. It gave purpose to former soldiers while providing skilled professionals to construction sites across the state. Around noon, Cooper received an unexpected visitor. Rick, his police contact, arrived with interesting news. "Thought you'd want to know," Rick said, settling into a chair. "The Desert Raiders officially disbanded last week. Hawk left town months ago, and without his leadership, the whole thing fell apart." Cooper wasn't surprised. After their confrontation, the Raiders' reputation had been shattered. Other construction sites had started implementing similar security measures, making it impossible for gangs to continue their intimidation tactics. "Any idea where Hawk ended up?" Cooper asked. Rick smiled. "Funny you should ask. Last I heard, he's working as a legitimate security consultant in Nevada. Apparently, your approach made quite an impression on him." Later that afternoon, Cooper led a meeting with his expanding team. The conference room was full of faces, both familiar and new. Veterans finding their place in civilian life, former security guards now trained as professionals, and site managers learning to protect their projects. "Our success started with one simple principle," Cooper addressed the room. "We didn't fight force with force. We used strategy, preparation, and professionalism. That's what we'll continue teaching others." Jake stood up to share the latest statistics. "In the past 6 months, construction site theft in our protected areas has dropped by 85%. Not just from gangs, but all types of criminal activity. And our surveillance systems have been adopted by 12 major construction companies," Davis added. "We're changing the whole industry's approach to security." After the meeting, Cooper walked through their training facility with Tommy. The young man who had once been a nervous night guard now carried himself with confidence, teaching others what he had learned. "Remember that first night when the Raiders showed up?" Tommy asked. "I was terrified. Now look at us, we're training people to handle situations like that professionally." Cooper stopped at the facility's main entrance, where a plaque hung on the wall. It read, "Veteran Security Solutions, Protecting Through Professionalism." Below were the words that had become their company motto, "Strategy over force." "You know what really made the difference?" Cooper said to Tommy. "It wasn't just about having military experience. It was about applying those skills the right way. We didn't try to be tougher than the Raiders, we were just smarter and more professional." As the day ended, Cooper received one final visitor, Mike Torres, the original site supervisor who had hired him. "We're breaking ground on 3 new projects," Torres announced proudly. "The company won't use any security firm except yours now. You didn't just save one construction site, Cooper, you changed how the whole industry thinks about security." Standing outside as the sun set, Cooper watched his trainees practicing patrol patterns. In the distance, he could hear the sound of motorcycles, regular people going about their day, no longer a source of tension or fear. His phone buzzed with a message from Davis. "Just got contracts for 5 more sites. The Cooper method is becoming industry standard." Cooper smiled. The confrontation with the Desert Raiders had been more than just a victory over one gang. It had shown that the right combination of military experience, a professional approach, and strategic thinking could solve problems that force alone never could. As night fell over the city, lights came on at construction sites across Phoenix. Sites now protected by veterans trained in the methods that had worked so well against the Raiders. The soldier had not only won his battle, he had changed the entire war.